Thanks, Chris, and thanks to the conference. Really excited to be here today and excited to talk about what has been a pretty fun and amazing story in our proliferation into the various app spaces. When I joined Pandora in 2004, the company was in the kiosk business. We sold kiosks for record stores to help sell CDs. And there were about 5 engineers there. The internet radio idea was a marketing spec, and honestly, none of these engineers really believed in the opportunity. There had been a few internet radio companies to go out of business before we embarked on our path, and they had never really been heavy users. It was interesting, Chris was using Winamp before, and I'm sure many of you, as I did, used Winamp back in 03, 04 to listen to things like Shoutcast. But ultimately, there were many businesses that went out before us. So we convinced them to stay, and about 8 months into 2005, we launched our first application on the web. And about 2 months after we streamed our first track, we were featured in a article in Der Spiegel on the print and online edition in Germany. And we had these huge peaks in the middle of the night, and it took us actually a couple days to figure out what it was, but I think at that point we realized that we had something that people really enjoyed. Fast forward to now, and as Chris said, we have 100 million registered users on over 400 connected devices. But the reality is we feel like we've just scratched the surface, and there's so much more to do in this space to continue to bring Pandora to where our listeners want to be. Our main goal is to bring a personalized radio experience to wherever our listeners are and deliver music they love. And from the beginning, we've tried to build out a platform that would allow us to extend that in many places. And I think it's interesting, here we are at the Developers Conference, and a lot of people think of this as just mobile or just smartphone space. And I had an interesting question to ask. How many of you are on a single platform today? How many are on 5 platforms today? 10, 20? I mean, because ultimately we all want to be on many more places than we are now. And so I think it's important for you all to think about not just mobile tablets or the like, but more about even some of the controlled environments like TVs and Blu-ray players, things like Roku and some of the connected living room devices that present interesting opportunities. And today I want to talk about some of the principles that drive our product development and our platform. And I want to walk you through an evolution of where we started and where we got where we are today, as well as some thoughts about what's next. There are 2 things that drive every product decision at Pandora. John mentioned ease. We call it simplicity. Making Pandora incredibly easy to use. We want your grandma to be able to log into Pandora or start Pandora on her iPhone if she has one and listen to music. We want her to be able to create a station. We want her to be able to easily give us feedback about the tracks she doesn't like and does like so that we can make a better stream for her. Additionally, we've always valued accessibility. We've always wanted to make Pandora available wherever our listeners are. And I think it's important for you all to think about not just the platform you want to be in, but where your app is appropriate, where is the opportunity, and how are you going to get there. Our story is one of many. There's lots of other interesting stories about companies that have proliferated in very different ways with very different applications across the device world. Angry Birds most recently launched on the Roku device, and they have a Blu-ray connected remote that your kids can play through this $80 Roku box. They can play Angry Birds on your living room TV. Additionally, Netflix has a really interesting story that's quite a bit different than ours, and I think they're on a similar number of devices. Here's a picture of our of our iPhone app. Super simple, really easy to grok. Thumb up, thumb down. But first, we should go back to the beginning, about 6+ years ago when we launched our first version of Pandoracom. This launched on 8/29/2005. This is basically a flash tuner, a pretty large flash tuner where all the logic exists. That's just sitting in the middle of a web page. And, well, before we redesigned it, had a much more integrated look, but back then it was just basically a flash tuner in the middle of a page. We've done a bunch. From the beginning, we made some really wise decisions around our architecture. We've always worked to delineate presentation and UI from business logic and application logic, and subsequently keeping the media server and media serving audio in our case separate from all that. I don't think it's worth going into a ton of detail, but some decisions we made here to put all of the user sort of experience in the front end set us up well for the device world. First came our first foray in devices about a year and a half after we launched the website, was into two specific living room devices. We started actually with the Squeeze box, and they wrote their device against the version that the tuner was using, which was great. And then, and it was a really good experience for us to do something different than the web. And then shortly after that, we worked with Sonos to launch a version, the very first version of our device partner API. These partners were really awesome because they understood a lot more about the living room and the device world than we did. They're also very technically savvy, and they taught us a ton about how to extend the listening experience into new places. I believe that both of these platforms have had things like Shoutcast for many years before us. So they had a lot more experience in this space than we did. And generally, I've found it useful for us to continually try to find partners we can learn from and work with closely. Shortly after that, we started developing for feature phones. At peak, we were on over 80 different flip phones and J2ME-enabled smartphones. My desk was a complete mess, covered with all these prototypes, and some case with modeling clay covering the exterior, because at some point these device manufacturers really wanted to get things on their phones, apps on their phones. Initially, we had outsourced this work because we had no J2ME experience in-house, but ultimately we brought that development back in and turned a bunch of Java developers, or a few Java developers, into J2ME developers. But this is a really difficult platform to develop for. I mean, we probably had 6 different razors that we worked on with all sorts of different finicky little problems. The displays are really tiny and really difficult to make a compelling UI in such a small space. And I think the biggest benefit of this whole project was that we learned a ton about the cell networks and how to make a reliable stream across them. And that lent itself really well later on when it came to the iOS and Android platforms, along with RIM and Palm. We had a small detour into clock radios, which was pretty interesting too. This is a Chumby and a Receiva-based device. Receiva was a chipset we supported that probably plays on a few, maybe 20 different clock radios. These were interesting and, again, pushed us in a new direction. These were much more competitively priced than the other devices we'd worked on, which means that they're lacking any sort of processing power or, interaction display and controls. And it was really hard for us to build a UI that we viewed as simple, particularly on a 4-line display that's a fixed width. And one of our ethos being, one of our sort of guiding principles being simple, this was a really difficult thing to do, but what ultimately we worked really close with these partners to try to build interfaces that work within their platform. And I think that's a really important learning too, trying to work with your partners, again, to make a compelling experience that fits within the UI for a given platform, while also trying to maintain our principles. Then came iOS. Around the office, we call it the game changer because it was quick to proliferate. And it's probably one of the reasons we're all here today. And as I walked into that ARM conference, imagining that this conference would probably be in that place in a few years, and they might be back here, as the way the app world is developing. But ultimately, we were really lucky to be there on day one with the iOS and continue to have a really popular app that works really well. Shortly after that, we had the next wave of the smartphone. And these are all completely different than iOS. Different markets, different users, and they work in quite a different way. Again, we wanted to try to make a UI that fits within the platform while also maintaining our simplicity. It's interesting because in the case of Android, there's lots of really well integrated features that you can take advantage of at the user interface level, such as taking advantage of the notification, or there's a bunch of integrations with the media player on Android as well. And there's a lot of pretty cool multi-touch gesture features on Palm that we wanted to take advantage of. But that was, again, pretty challenging, and again, I think we got good guidance from our partners. And I think one thing we think about all these apps is, as long as we have users there, they're never really done. I think a lot of us build an app and just put it down and leave it and expect it to just take off and expect people to engage with it. But the reality is the networks are changing, there's devices coming out all the time, and in the case of Android, OSs, and you need to be able to take advantage of what they're doing. So you should always be working on your apps, improving your apps, and we sure try to. Then we had the second wave in the living room. Now this is when we really started to proliferate towards 400. And these devices really came in many different forms, from Blu-ray players to, there's a picture of that, the recent Roku up there, to Western digital hard drive media players. And this was a really challenging space to get into, from a resource and development-wise to just managing the various partner worlds. On some of these platforms, we've been working with sometimes 3 different partners to get onto the platform. And that's no cakewalk, as I'm sure you know. Some learnings here. It's really important to get FaceTime with your partners. I'm sure we all have experience to that effect. We had one particular partner who had a really hard time getting their app going. And they ultimately sent a couple engineers to our office, and their bosses told them, don't come back till it's done, or you won't have a job. And they were there for 14 days straight, 16-hour days, and we helped them get it done. But it's really meant we've really built a great relationship with this particular partner. We got to know these engineers, and we got to know the organization that they work in. We've also tried, in many cases, we've tried multiple times to build an application that could be deployed in many platforms. And that's also it's worked out really well in a few cases. In one case where it worked out, we worked closely with this chipset manufacturer to build a really compelling UI. And it came out great. It was recognized by the CE manufacturers, and that particular chipset's been absorbed and proliferated. Managing change carefully. All of these are somewhat obvious, right? We have all these 400 devices, most of which connect directly to our API. That the app is baked into many of these platforms. And I think it's happened twice in 4 years, but just last week we made a small change to an auth token, and just in length, and it broke one particular device. We heard from them within 10 minutes, and we reverted a couple hours later. But it was a good reminder for us to be careful as well, because we're constantly reminding them to be careful. And then again, we offer really high quality documentation and support for our partners, who are, in most cases, are developing these apps themselves. we have a team of 3 or 4 engineers who work with the partners over email mostly, and we're very responsive and engaging. I think they appreciate that, and we're constantly trying to roll that feedback back into our product and back into our documentation. I think this is one of the newer platforms that is pretty interesting. The tablet, a lot of us try to cram our mobile apps into, or expand our mobile apps into the iPad or into any sort of tablet space, or we try to cram our website into the tablet space, and neither of those work. It's really important to think about as a new space. It has a whole different feature set than either, at least graphically. And what we did with the iPad is we developed a whole new interface for it, and one that we're pretty proud of and our users seem to like as well. And what's interesting about this is, although this has been out a couple years, it was actually the motivator for the redesigned website we just launched last month. The station list, the controls, and the album information, the bio is all much more accessible than it had been in the past. Way more accessible than that first image of our site you saw. And then we've been working on the car. The car is really interesting because it's a whole different space with a whole different set of partners. The way it works is we've introduced an API in our app on the phones on a few of the platforms, and so we work closely with the device manufacturers to write to that API so that when you're driving, you're actually streaming Pandora over your phone, but your controls are in the car, on your steering wheel, over voice, or even on the dash, depending on the feature set of the phone. But automotive partners are a whole different beast. They work on incredibly long timelines. They have this complicated web of tiered part providers and partners that we've had to navigate. The first wave of automotive stuff we've done was in aftermarket radios, and it seemed kind of silly at the time because these are like $1,000 stereos that they'll be lucky to sell 1,000 units. But the reality is it was really great for us. It was a great experience to get to know what it's like to bring radio, personalized radio to the car, and also to help us navigate the sort of technical work as well as the partner management. Another thing we did with the car integrations is put a huge effort into understanding the entire feature set of the platform. So the quality of the Bluetooth stack varies greatly from auto manufacturer to auto manufacturer, and we know a ton about how that works and what we need to prepare for and handle. And we also did a ton of work to understand what the interfaces are to the driver, be it voice in some cases, I think in the case of the Ford, and in others it's just in the dash or the steering wheel. Because for us to really make a compelling experience, we wanted again to, we wanted the track feedback to be accessible, and we wanted station management to be easy and accessible. But we put a lot of effort in up front, and hopefully it'll pay off. Many of these devices could be around for decades to come. That's probably a slight exaggeration, but because it's hard to imagine we're going to all have an iPhone in 10 years, but you could be driving the same car. Maybe you'll just keep your iPhone around for Pandora. And then we most recently relaunched our website, and we spent 2 years designing and developing this thing. Maybe you've used it. Again, it looks a lot like the iPad app. The controls fixed at the top, the station list along the left much longer, and a lot more stations are accessible. And then again, the song history and the bios. But in this case, the tuner is floating, which gives us a little more to do on the page with respect to advertising or other things. One thing that was interesting about this experience, and we didn't really realize it till we put the whole thing together, and probably a couple months before we launched, is that it looks pretty damn good on a large TV. It's a little busy here, but with the resizable album art and the fixed controls that really pop out, you can imagine how we could extend this experience to the smart TV. So how do we get to this point? We try to build really strong business and technical relationships with our partners. I've talked a lot about that. We try to keep our APIs simple and stable, but flexible. So we have some tokenization that we can utilize when necessary. We actually had, I'm sure some of you have heard audio ads if you listen to Pandora on your iPhone. We actually had audio ads built into the API a couple years before we actually ever played our first device audio ad. But generally, that we keep the API really stable. We try to choose our devices carefully. We have to make tough decisions, and we want to be wherever we can possibly be. But the reality is we need to choose quality devices that are going to give the user a really good experience. And these last two are slightly contradictory, but the reality is we're always struggling with both. We want to support as many as we can. So how can we become as ubiquitous as Coca-Cola? I think we'd all like to strive for that. We really try to watch the trends. We try not to make any snap decisions with respect to which platforms we're going to go on. We want to understand where the industry is going, but generally we want to continue to work to make Pandora available in more places. I just want to take a little sidebar to talk about how the process works, because I think I talk a lot about how all these devices and how we got there, but this is generally the process we've used for the past 4 years. We have a dev center where people can apply for access to our API. We go through some review process. Then they start development. And they get access. They get a key that gives access to a developer site in addition to access to the support team and our documentation. Once a device is approved, and this is kind of a key step for us, once the device is developed, they send us an actual physical device that we test. And we run a battery of tests on them, over 100 tests, make sure that thumbs always register properly, make sure that simple things work and complicated things work, like just simply station creation or station switching or turning off the device and where does it drop you back in. So that's been really fruitful for us and very difficult for our partners. It probably takes 1 or 2 iterations. We probably average 1 or 2 iterations, maybe a few more with these partners and getting through the certification process. And once approved, we allow them to launch the product against our production servers. And I guess this isn't obvious, but your account exists wherever you are, so on every platform. So we also have a sort of device tying mechanism, somewhat akin to a lot of what the other folks have done, like Netflix. So once you tie your device to your account, your stations appear, your feedback is shared across all. So what's really hard for us? It's a delicate space with 400 devices out there and a little bit stressful, like it was last week. And that makes it really hard for us to bring new features to the platform. We don't own these apps. These apps actually exist on the hardware in the form of firmware. And while the manufacturers occasionally update, they seldom are willing to update our app. So that's pretty hard because we just made a change to the website where we shifted to a new sort of model for finding tracks and things that you like with a more modern like mechanism as opposed to the previous version, which was about bookmarks. And it'll be years before we can proliferate that change across the platform. Some of these partners are putting firmware updates that have nothing to do with our app, and it breaks. And we hear from our users, they hear from the users, and we scramble. And also, over the years, some of these manufacturers are releasing new hardware versions with the same app, and a few have forgotten to test, so we work with them and encourage them to test. So what are we doing about it? I was thinking this morning this slide was a little more amusing before the tear gas and bean bags started, but I didn't really get time to remove the picture, and I didn't have a different joke, so we'll just have to go with it. Particularly because our office is about 6 blocks from the Okinawa, or Hank? The plaza in Oakland. Frank. So what I was going to say is we should all try to occupy the device world. But it's pretty dark. But the reality is we all want to take control back of our apps. And I think that will be beneficial in the long run for all of us, including the device manufacturers. So what's the silver bullet? We're all looking for some sort of magical solution. And I think in a space where we should go ask the ARM folks. Are they going to come up with any standards that could help us? Maybe we should join conferences. But the reality is there is no magical solution. There's not necessarily going to be a way that we can build an app that can work on every platform, and not just because the user interface is different, but because the challenges and technologies are different. But there is this thing called HTML5, and I think we're all pretty hopeful that will give us a lot of opportunity going forward. So how can we innovate our product? Again, we want to bring more features to the platform. Another thing we need to do is segregate our APIs a little bit in our applications, where our devices and mobile share a similar API, and they're on entirely different release schedules and scaling. And then ultimately, I think we all, again, want to wield back control of the product to make it so that we have complete control, not the device developer or manufacturer. Yeah. So, parting thoughts about the future. It seems to me like it's back to the future. The app world space is really interesting. We get to it's leveled the playing field. You can make an app, you can release it. It gets available to all these people. But the reality is, it's like shipping a packaged software CD, because in some cases it's 2 weeks before you can touch it again if there's an issue. And I think that's not going to last in the long run. So it's pretty stressful. I mean, we find it pretty stressful to have 2 weeks tied between some of our app updates. So we'd have to do a ton of testing, just like the olden days when we were shipping CDs. Any of you ever ship CDs? I did. And then remember the CDR? That was cool when that came out, because then you could do it at the office. So anyways, I think the reality is the device manufacturers don't really want to be in the app development space either. For them, it's selling units. And so I think they're more than willing to give us back control, but the challenging thing for them to do is to give us a platform that we can build a really compelling experience on. And so, but I think we're honestly going to see things change going forward, where the app development space is going to look a lot more like the web than it does today. Thanks for having me, and hopefully this gives you some insight into our story. And what? Yeah, we are. And we're in Oakland. And it's much safer than it might seem over the past few days. I drove right through. I did not smell the tear gas. But honestly, we feel like we've just scratched the surface of a truly ubiquitous Pandora. I'm sure you guys all feel like you have a ton of work to do. There's so many more places we can bring Pandora to make it an easy, personalized listening experience for our users. Thanks for hosting me, and I hope you guys have a good conference.